August 14th, 1938. A Saturday night on Lenox Avenue in Harlem. The Small's Paradise nightclub was packed with over 300 people. Musicians, dancers, working families celebrating payday, couples on dates. The temperature outside was 89 degrees. Inside, it was hotter. At 10:47 p.m., four white men walked through the front door. They weren't police. They weren't gangsters from downtown. They were something worse. Three of them wore cheap suits that didn't fit right. The fourth wore his uniform openly, the white robes and hood of the Ku Klux Klan, folded back just enough to show his face. The music stopped mid-note. The four men walked straight to a corner table where a 22-year-old man named Willie Johnson sat with his girlfriend and two friends. Willie was Bumpy Johnson's cousin, younger, quieter, not involved in the street life that had made Bumpy's name legendary in Harlem. "You Willie Johnson?" the man in front asked. Willie stood up. "Who's asking?" What happened next took less than 60 seconds. Two of the men grabbed Willie by the arms. The third shoved his girlfriend back in her seat when she tried to intervene. The fourth, the one in the Klan robe, pulled out a rope. Not a weapon, a rope. They dragged Willie toward the door. 300 people watched. The band stood frozen on stage. The bartender's hand hovered over the phone. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because in 1938, this wasn't unusual. This was terror in its purest form. The kind that paralyzes an entire room because everyone knows that resistance means death, not just for one person, but for dozens. But there was one problem with their plan. Willie Johnson wasn't just anybody's cousin. And Bumpy Johnson wasn't the kind of man who let family business go unanswered. The question wasn't whether he would respond. The question was how many people would die when he did. What happened in the next 4 hours would become one of the most talked about nights in Harlem history. Not because of violence, but because of what didn't happen. Because of the moment an entire neighborhood held its breath and waited for one man to arrive. To understand that night, you have to understand Harlem in 1938. The neighborhood stretched from 110th Street to 155th Street, roughly 3.5 square miles containing over 220,000 African Americans, the largest black urban community in the United States. The Renaissance was fading. The Depression was crushing. Unemployment in Harlem was 60%, twice the rate of white neighborhoods downtown. But Harlem wasn't powerless. It was organized. Numbers rackets employed thousands. The Cotton Club, the Savoy Ballroom, Small's Paradise. These weren't just entertainment venues. They were economic engines, community centers, places where black culture thrived despite everything working against it. And they were protected, not by police. The NYPD's 28th Precinct was notoriously corrupt and openly hostile to black residents. Protected by men like Bumpy Johnson. By 1938, Bumpy was 33 years old and controlled significant portions of Harlem's underground economy in partnership with the Luciano crime family. His arrangement was unique in American organized crime. A black gangster operating with equal authority to white mobsters, splitting profits fairly, enforcing rules that kept violence away from civilians. But outside Harlem, in places like the Bronx, Queens, and parts of Brooklyn, the Ku Klux Klan was experiencing a resurgence. Not the rural Southern Klan of burning crosses and midnight lynchings. This was an urban Klan, police officers, city workers, union members who met in lodge halls and planned intimidation campaigns against black neighborhoods, expanding beyond traditional boundaries. In July 1938, a black family moved into a building on the edge of Harlem near 110th Street. Within a week, their windows were smashed. Within 2 weeks, threatening letters arrived. By August, Klan members were making bold daytime appearances, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push. That's what brought them to Small's Paradise on August 14th. Willie Johnson had done nothing wrong. He worked as a porter at Grand Central Terminal, earned $18 a week, attended church on Sundays. But he was a Johnson, and to men looking to send a message, family connections were all the justification they needed. The Klan members who grabbed Willie that night weren't random thugs. According to later police reports, they included a transit officer, a dock worker, and two men with connections to Tammany Hall political clubs. The one in the robe was making a statement. "We can do this openly, and nobody will stop us." They were half right. Nobody stopped them at Small's Paradise. 300 people watched them drag Willie onto Lenox Avenue, throw him into a black Ford sedan, and drive north toward the Bronx. But someone did make a phone call. 10:52 p.m., 5 minutes after Willie was taken. The bartender at Small's Paradise, a man named Jerome Miller, finally picked up the phone. He didn't call the police. He called a number he'd memorized years ago, a number that connected to a pool hall on 147th Street. They took Willie Johnson, Jerome said. 4 white men, 1 wearing Klan. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. Then where's Bumpy? Don't know. Somebody find him. In 1938, Harlem had its own communication network, faster than police radios, more reliable than telephone operators. Within 15 minutes, the word had spread to 20 different locations. Bumpy Johnson's cousin had been taken by Klan members, heading north, maybe toward the Bronx, maybe toward Westchester County, where lynchings still happened in rural areas. Bumpy wasn't in Harlem that night. According to multiple accounts, he was in Lower Manhattan meeting with Frank Costello about a business dispute involving a downtown speakeasy. The meeting was important. Thousands of dollars were at stake. But when the call reached him at 11:07 p.m., he stood up mid-sentence. "We're done here," he told Costello. "What happened?" Costello asked. "Family business." Costello, who had his own complicated relationship with respect and family loyalty, nodded. "You need help? Not your kind of help. Not yet." What Bumpy meant was clear. If this turned into a mob war, if Italian families got involved in what was essentially a racial terrorism incident, it would spiral into something nobody could control. This had to be handled carefully. Bumpy made 4 phone calls from Costello's office. The first was to his driver. The second was to a Harlem police sergeant named Thomas Wyatt, one of only 17 black officers in the entire NYPD, a man who walked a dangerous line between his badge and his community. "Tom, they took Willie. I need to know where without starting a riot." Sergeant Wyatt understood immediately. If Bumpy went looking publicly, if he mobilized his entire organization, Harlem would explode. The Klan would respond. White police would respond. Dozens could die. "Give me 20 minutes, Wyatt said. The third call went to Stephanie St. Clair, Bumpy's former boss and still a powerful figure in Harlem. "Madam, keep people calm. I'm handling this." The fourth call went to Small's Paradise. "Tell everyone to stay inside. Anyone leaves, anyone talks, this gets worse." By 11:30 p.m., something extraordinary was happening on Lenox Avenue. Word had spread that Bumpy was coming, that he was handling it, that everyone needed to wait. Small's Paradise stayed packed. The Savoy Ballroom, 3 blocks away, also stayed open but quiet. People filled the streets, but they weren't panicking. They were waiting. 11:35 p.m. Sergeant Thomas Wyatt made his calls. He couldn't use police channels. Too many sympathetic ears in the department. Too many officers who wouldn't mind seeing a black man disappear. Instead, he called contacts in the Bronx, transit workers who saw everything, porters who knew which cars were moving north. At 11:42 p.m., he got confirmation. A black Ford sedan had been spotted on the concourse in the Bronx, heading toward a warehouse district near the Harlem River. 4 white men. 1 black man who appeared to be restrained. Wyatt called Bumpy. Concourse in 161st, warehouse area. Bumpy's car was already moving. He had 3 men with him, not soldiers, not muscle. These were men he trusted to think, not just shoot. One was named Junie Bird, a veteran of the Great War who'd seen real combat. Another was Rollins Edwards, a former lawyer who'd been disbarred for defending a black defendant too aggressively. The third was Bumpy's driver, a quiet man known only as Blue. They reached the Bronx at 11:58 p.m. The warehouse district was dark, industrial, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry. Bumpy's car rolled slowly past 3 buildings before Blue spotted the black Ford parked behind a meatpacking plant. There, Blue said. Bumpy didn't rush. That's what made him different. Where other men would have charged in, he watched. He studied the building. 2 floors. Loading dock. 1 entrance visible from the street. Probably another in the back. How many inside? Junie asked. At least 4. Maybe more. They might have called backup. This was the decision point. Bumpy could wait for more of his own men. Within an hour, he could have 50 people here. But that meant Willie stayed in danger longer. Or he could move now with just the 3 men he had. He chose a third option. Bumpy got out of the car alone. He walked to the building's front entrance, a metal door under a broken light. He didn't knock. He pushed it open and walked inside. The room was maybe 30 feet square, empty except for some crates and a table. Willie Johnson was tied to a chair in the center. His face was bruised. Blood ran from his nose. But he was alive and conscious. The 4 Klan members stood around him. 2 held wooden bats. 1 held the rope. The 4th, the one who'd worn the robe, held a knife. They all turned when Bumpy walked in. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said quietly, "we need to talk." Bumpy Johnson stood 6 feet inside the warehouse, hands visible, no weapon drawn. The man with the knife, later identified as Raymond Schuller, a 31-year-old transit officer, smiled. "You Bumpy Johnson?" "I am. We heard about you. Supposed to be some kind of king in Harlem." Schuller's smile widened. "You don't look like much." Bumpy didn't react. He looked at Willie. "You okay?" Willie nodded weakly. "Good," Bumpy said. Then he looked back at the 4 men. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to untie my cousin. You're going to walk out of here. And you're going to forget this happened." Schuller laughed. "Or what? You going to shoot us?" 4 against 1. "You don't even have your gun drawn." "I don't need a gun," Bumpy said. That's when the door behind Bumpy opened. Junie, Rollins, and Blue walked in, still not drawing weapons. Just standing there. 4 against 4 now. But Schuller still had the confidence of a man who believed the system protected him. "You kill us, you start a war. Every cop in New York will hunt you. The Klan has hundreds of members in this city. You think Harlem can survive that?" Bumpy nodded slowly. "You're right. I kill you, it starts a war. That's why I'm not going to kill you." "Then what?" "I'm going to do worse." The room went quiet. Bumpy pulled out a small notebook and a pen. He looked at each man carefully, studying their faces. Then he started writing. Raymond Schuller, transit officer, badge number 4127, lives at 438 East 180th Street. Wife's name Margaret. 2 kids, Raymond Jr., age 7, and little Susan, age 4. Schuller's smile vanished. Bumpy looked at the next man. Patrick Doherty, dock worker, local 824. Lives with his mother at 623 Cortlandt Avenue. "She's sick, isn't she?" "Cancer, I heard." Doherty's face went pale. Bumpy continued through all 4 men. Names, addresses, family members, jobs, every detail that made them human, that made them vulnerable. "Here's how this works," Bumpy said calmly. "You let Willie go, nothing happens. You go home. You forget we met. But if anything, and I mean anything, happens to him, to any member of my family, to anyone in Harlem, I will remember these names." "You threatening us?" Schuller tried to sound tough, but his voice cracked. "No, I'm explaining consequences. You wanted to send a message tonight. You wanted to show that you could come into Harlem, take one of us, and nobody would stop you. Well, message received. Now here's mine. You touch my family, I don't come for you. I come for yours." It was brilliant and terrifying. Bumpy wasn't threatening violence. He was threatening something more permanent. The same fear they'd try to create in Harlem turned back on them. The understanding that your home, your family, your life could be disrupted at any moment by people you couldn't see coming down. If you're watching this and want to see more true stories about how power really worked in 20th century America, not the Hollywood version, but the real negotiations that happened in warehouses and backrooms, subscribe to the channel. This is just the beginning. Schuller looked at the other 3 men. None of them spoke. Finally, he lowered the knife. "Cut him loose," Schuller said quietly. 12:31 a.m., August 15th, 1938. Willie Johnson walked out of that warehouse with Bumpy's arm around his shoulders. The Klan members stayed inside until Bumpy's car was gone. According to later accounts, they didn't leave for another 30 minutes, afraid that it was a trap, that someone was waiting outside to shoot them. Nobody was. On the drive back to Harlem, Willie finally spoke. "I thought I was dead." "I know," Bumpy said. "Why didn't you kill them? You could have. They deserved it." Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Killing them would have been easy. But dead, they're martyrs. Alive, they're afraid. Fear lasts longer than anger. It was a lesson Bumpy had learned over a decade in the streets. Violence has diminishing returns. You can only kill someone once, and then they become a story, a reason for revenge, a rallying cry. But fear, controlled, specific fear that could last years. The car reached Harlem at 1:08 a.m. Small's Paradise was still packed. When Bumpy's car pulled up and Willie stepped out visibly alive, the crowd erupted. Not in violence, in relief. People surrounded Willie, touching him, making sure he was real. His girlfriend, who'd been crying for 3 hours, fell into his arms. The band started playing again. Someone started singing. Within minutes, Lenox Avenue transformed from a tense standoff into a celebration. Bumpy didn't stay for it. He went home, but the story spread through Harlem like wildfire. The details got exaggerated, as details do. Some versions said Bumpy walked into the warehouse alone and fought all 4 men. Some said he had 20 gunmen surrounding the building. Some said he did kill the Klan members and buried them where they'd never be found. The truth was both simpler and more powerful. Bumpy Johnson had walked into a situation where he was outnumbered, outgunned by men who had the law on their side, and he'd won without firing a shot. That's real power. The NYPD never filed a report about Willie Johnson's kidnapping. Officially, it never happened, but something shifted in Harlem after that night. The Klan didn't come back. Not to Small's Paradise. Not to any nightclub or business in the neighborhood. There were no more bold daytime appearances, no more threatening letters to families who moved into borderline buildings. What changed wasn't the law. It was the understanding. Harlem wasn't undefended. It had structure, organization, and leadership willing to respond. Not with riots that could be crushed by police, but with targeted, strategic action that made aggression too costly. Raymond Schuller transferred to a different transit line within a month. Patrick Doherty quit the Klan and moved to New Jersey. The other 2 men whose names Bumpy wrote down that night were never publicly identified, but both reportedly left New York within a year. None of them ever spoke publicly about what happened in that warehouse. But the message got through to the broader Klan organization in New York City. Harlem is off limits. Willie Johnson lived another 43 years. He never joined Bumpy's organization, never got involved in street life. He worked at Grand Central Terminal until 1972, retired, and spent his remaining years in a small apartment on 145th Street. He rarely talked about that night, but when he did, he always said the same thing. "My cousin didn't save me with a gun. He saved me with his mind." Bumpy Johnson himself never mentioned the incident publicly. In his worldview, protecting family wasn't something you bragged about. It was simply what you did. But the story became legend in Harlem. It was told in barbershops and bars, passed down through generations. The details changed depending on who was telling it, but the core remained the same. The night Bumpy Johnson walked into a Klan warehouse and walked out with his cousin alive. In 1948, a sociologist from Columbia University named Dr. Kenneth Clark interviewed dozens of Harlem residents for a study on community power structures. Multiple people mentioned the Willie Johnson incident as a defining moment, not just for Bumpy's reputation, but for the neighborhood's sense of security. "We knew the police wouldn't protect us," one resident told Dr. Clark. "We knew the law wasn't on our side, but we also knew that if something happened, there were people who would respond. That meant something. That meant we weren't completely abandoned. It's a complicated legacy. Bumpy Johnson was a criminal. He ran illegal gambling, controlled violent enforcers, and enriched himself from an underground economy that exploited addiction and desperation. But in a society that offered black communities no legal protection, no political representation, and no economic opportunity, he provided an alternative power structure. Was it justice? No. Was it better than nothing? That's the question Harlem residents had to answer for themselves every day. By the time Bumpy died in 1968, the world had changed dramatically. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, black political power was rising through legitimate channels. The kind of protection Bumpy offered was becoming less necessary. But in 1938, on a hot August night, when 4 Klan members dragged a 22-year-old porter out of a nightclub, legal channels weren't an option. Police weren't an option. Peaceful protest wasn't an option. What was available was one man willing to walk into a warehouse, outnumbered and outgunned, and negotiate from a position of moral authority backed by the willingness to follow through on consequences. The crowd at Small's Paradise didn't move when Willie Johnson was taken. They stayed frozen, waiting because they understood the reality of their situation. Moving meant death. Fighting meant mass retaliation. But they also knew someone was coming. Someone who understood power the way they needed it understood. Not as violence for its own sake, but as protection, as deterrence, as the promise that even in a system designed to destroy them, they weren't completely helpless. That's why they waited. That's why the crowd didn't move until Bumpy Johnson arrived. And that's why, 86 years later, the story still gets told.